And as we look at challenging times here at home and the failed policies of the Biden administration, and as we see an increasingly dangerous world where American leadership seems to be faltering, again, I think the American people know that we can look to our highest ideals and ultimately look to Him who has ever guided the destiny of the American people and guides us to this day.
Welcome, Mr. Vice President, to the Rosenberg Report. It's great to have you on the program.
Thank you, Joel. Thanks for having me on.
Look, I just finished and absolutely loved your new book, which I'm holding up right now, So Help Me God, for lots of reasons that we're going to talk about tonight. My goodness, you and the president had one of arguably the most consequential administrations since the Reagan years. And we literally don't have time tonight to go through all of it, but I want to tick off just a few of your accomplishments right up front. You and the president appointed pro-life justices to the Supreme Court that finally brought an end to Roe v. Wade and has saved countless unborn babies. You cut taxes. You created a roaring economy. You moved the U.S. Embassy from Tel Aviv right here to where I am, where I live in Jerusalem. You guys brokered 4 Arab-Israeli peace treaties, scrapped the insane Iran nuclear deal, crushed the ISIS caliphate, got tough, really tough, thank God, with the communist Chinese, made huge progress on building the border wall. I mean, I could go on and on and on, which is why your book is so long and people need to read it from cover to cover.
Thank you, Joel. It's high praise coming from one of my favorite authors.
Oh, well, thank you. Well, there was a lot riding on this book, in my view, because I think some people have forgotten what a fighter you have been in Congress, as a reformer in Congress, as a reformer as a governor, and of course you were a key partner in all the sweeping reforms that you and the president did. But while you're very respectful of the president in this book, I need our viewers to know that you pull no punches. You were very, very candid about what happened leading up to January 6th, on that terrible day and the aftermath, including the subpoena that you're facing now. So I want to get into all of it. But the title of your book is So Help Me God. And that really speaks to 2 things. First, your faith in Jesus Christ and your absolute bedrock determination to preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States against all threats with the help of God. And so that's a position that's cost you deeply and personally, but it begins with your faith. So I want to start there, and I want to quote you to you, okay? I want to quote chapter 2 that you write, as my freshman year neared its end, I joined some friends on a road trip 2 hours south of where you're going to college, to Wilmore, Kentucky, which many people have not heard of, but they've heard of it now. The home of Asbury Theological Seminary and Asbury University. The town was the site, you write, of the Ichthus Festival, a week-long concert originally conceived as a Christian answer to Woodstock. And then you write, it was April, it was wet, it was muddy, yet you didn't leave. Instead, again, quoting the book, as though for the first time, I truly heard the words of John 3:16. Talk about what happened that night and how you're processing what you're seeing happen on the very campus where you came to faith in Christ.
Well, thanks for describing the book the way you have. It was a great privilege for me to write the book. I've been humbled by the response from around the country. It's really the story of a small town guy from southern Indiana, grandson of an Irish immigrant, son of a combat veteran and a precocious first generation American who's been on an extraordinary journey. But it's been the grace of God and my determination to support, uphold the principles enshrined in the Constitution of the United States that have really been the strongest aspirations of my life. But to your point, Joel, it's been so moving to me over the last several weeks to see what has come to be known as the Asbury Revival, where literally a chapel service at a small university in Wilmore, Kentucky, turns into a 24-hour, a 2-week revival that literally drew thousands of people from around the country and around the world to this little hamlet. It would be inspiring to any believer, but for me, thinking of that day in 1978 when I traveled to what was then Asbury College and I sat at a one of those early Christian music festivals, and not only heard the music, but I heard the message in a new and in renewed way. I'd largely walked away from the faith of my youth. I didn't think I needed God in my life, but I came under the influence of some very sincere people that simply talked to me about having a personal relationship with God through Jesus Christ. And it was on a rainy night in 1978, sitting there at that Asbury campus, that I made a decision to put my faith in Jesus Christ as my personal Lord and Savior, and it changed my life forever. And as I put out on social media last week, I wanted all those young people that were gathering around the clock at Asbury to know that the decisions that they're making there, the prayers they're praying there, are going to impact their lives now and forever, just as they have me.
Look, you're the only political leader that I've ever met or even heard of who for years and years has ended nearly all of your speeches, unless it's a major policy speech, by quoting 2 Chronicles 7:14, which God says, if my people who are called by my name will humble themselves and pray and seek my face and turn from their wicked ways, then I will hear from heaven and forgive their sins and heal their land. Why do you, in all of your life, but as vice president, all over the country, everywhere I saw you, every speech I ever heard of you, you say this? Why is this so central to your message? And it's interesting now that we're talking about what, could be a revival that spreads.
I've always believed that the source of American greatness is our faith, our freedom, and our vast natural resources. But the center of that greatness has been the faith of the American people. And I'm humbled that you'd reflect on that in my public addresses. But the truth is, if you read speeches by public men and women for the first 170 years of our nation's history, that speaking about the timeless values of our faith was very common in public life, because generations of Americans knew that was the wellspring. The words "in God we trust" appear just above the American flag in the House of Representatives. The faith of the American people has ever seen us through challenging times. And as we look at challenging times here at home and the failed policies of the Biden administration, and as we see an increasingly dangerous world where American leadership seems to be faltering again, I think the American people know that we can look to our highest ideals and ultimately look to Him who has ever guided the destiny of the American people and guides us to this day.
How much trouble do you think America really is in right now? Because look, we've murdered 63 million babies. We have a president right now who wants to pass a federal law institutionalizing Roe v. Wade forever so people can have an abortion on demand right up to the point of delivery. We have a president who can't or won't accept the fact that there are biological differences between men and women, and I could go on, but because we've discussed it, and you may even have read it. In 2012, I wrote a book called Implosion. Can America recover from its economic and spiritual challenges in time? And I'm curious, what do you think is the answer to that question? How do we turn this thing around?
I mean, look, you're describing the policies of a Democrat administration that's literally been overtaken by the radical left, and you're right. And I must tell you, when I think of all the accomplishments of the Trump-Pence administration, as I write in my book, I think the fact that we were able to appoint 3 of the justices that gave the American people a new beginning for life in that Dobbs decision and returned the question of abortion to the states and to the American people, I think towers over everything else that we were able to do. But since the Biden administration came into office, they literally have been one area after another, whether it be border security, whether it be energy, whether it be the economy, whether it be runaway spending, or whether it be a consistent assault on the traditional values of the American people, have taken us in a direction that I think is antithetical to the core values and principles of the majority of the American people. So for me, it's just simply about getting back to having government as good as our people, a government that is as grounded in our timeless ideals, understands what's worked, practices freedom. And Joel, I got a real good feeling that we're going to get back to having a government that will live up to the aspirations of the American people real soon.
Well, I hope that you're right, and I pray that you are. Well, we have so many threats facing the United States right now. I want to talk about some of them with you. Let's start with the border crisis. So you've got a book out in May. I've got my new political thriller coming out, The Libyan Diversion. And the central premise of the novel is that my CIA hero, Marcus Riker, he's hunting down the world's most dangerous terrorist in Libya. This guy's name is Abu Nakba. But Abu Nakba is at that very moment, while Marcus and his team are in Libya, sending terrorists and nuclear weapons into the United States via Mexico. Now, you and I first met over novels and when you were serving in Congress. But I have to ask you, you've been there, you've watched this crisis, you guys responded to it. But how realistic is this premise? Why has President Biden just basically thrown open the doors and let 2.7 million people, whom we don't know who they are, storm across the border? Do you worry that we run the risk of something that's 9/11-esque or even worse?
I am concerned about that, and obviously our extraordinary Border Patrol have interdicted and arrested people from what federal officials call other than Mexico countries. That generally is from the broader Middle East and generally people of suspicious intent toward our nation. So the reality is that's happening. Why it's happening is because President Joe Biden and the Democratic Party in America believe in open borders. On day one of his administration, they suspended construction of the border wall. We'd built hundreds of miles of border wall. And they suspended implementation of a policy that I negotiated with Mexico on the president's behalf called Remain in Mexico. It literally reduced illegal immigration and asylum abuse by 90% by making people wait in Mexico when they were applying for asylum in the United States. They disbanded that. Believe it or not, the Biden administration is now talking about some new version of that being put into effect. But look, the message they've sent south of the border is that the American border is open, and this enormous movement of people to our border it threatens the livelihood of the American people. It threatens the security of the country. And make no mistake about it, and I say this from my heart, there is suffering on both sides of the border because of the Biden administration's policy. The cartels have essentially gained operational control of our southern border. They exploit vulnerable people for cash and engage in the world's largest human trafficking operation, abusing particularly young women along the way, leaving the infirm and the elderly behind. We have to get back to the policies of our administration that secured our border. I know the Congress, the new majority, will be taking steps in that regard, but ultimately it's going to require presidential leadership to secure our border and to recognize that border security is national security. But the good news is we did it before, and we'll do it again, Joel.
You write this on page 264. You write that during a meeting late in 2017, the president went around the large table in the cabinet room asking each member of his team for his or her opinion on recognizing Jerusalem as Israel's capital and then moving the U.S. embassy from Tel Aviv right here to Jerusalem, where I live and where I'm talking to you from. Now, you write that the majority in that room, including the Secretary of State, the Defense Secretary, they were against the move because they said it would, quote, create chaos and lead to violence, unquote. Would you take us inside that meeting for just a few moments? And how is it possible that the majority of the Trump advising team was against this? And why were you one of the only ones urging the president to resist those naysayers and just do the right thing?
Remember, 4 previous administrations, Republican and Democrat, had promised in their campaigns to move the American embassy to Jerusalem and then withdrawn that promise. And I must tell you, I came to not agree with ever, but to understand that, because when our administration started to take steps toward recognizing and moving our embassy to Jerusalem, to say that every leader in the free world opposed it and expressed their opposition to the president would be an understatement, Joel. And even the majority of leaders in our foreign policy establishment and even in our administration were opposed to it. So I could understand, but not agree. I could understand how other presidents had been talked out of it. But in our case, we thought it was absolutely essential. And I give President Trump all the credit in the world for keeping his word to the American people and to our most cherished ally, Israel, in moving the embassy, because the opposition was literally overwhelming. But at the end of the day, in that cabinet meeting, as I described, and there were a few other members of our cabinet that stood with me on it, Israel is the only nation on earth where the American embassy is not in the capital of that country. Jerusalem is the eternal capital of Israel. I believe that history and the moment and the American people called for the president to move forward. But it was ultimately his decision to move the American embassy to Jerusalem. And I couldn't have been more proud to be alongside the day that he signed the papers and the day that I had the privilege of addressing the Knesset and describing that decision to the people in Israel. It was a historic move, a historic moment, and it proved just a few short years later, not only did it not create the chaos that all the foreign policy establishment and leaders around the free world predicted, but actually it created the conditions for peace in the historic Abraham Accords. I believe we're a byproduct of us sending an unambiguous message of support that America stands with Israel.
Well, thank you. And I remember you and I having lunch at the White House, and then you surprised me by inviting me in to meet with the president and just having a chance. I'd never been in the Oval Office. I've written a lot of scenes in my novels in that spot, but I never had been there. And be able to tell, you and him, thank you. It meant so much to me. And I want to pick up on that because we are approaching now the 75th anniversary of the Rebirth of Israel on May 14th, 1948. And I actually recently interviewed a former Israeli prime minister. It's an interview we'll be airing soon on the Rosenberg Report. But I asked him, do you believe that Israel's rebirth was a fulfillment of Bible prophecy? I thought that was sort of a standard question, but he stunned me by saying no. He said, absolutely not. It came about only through the hard work and the fight of Jewish people returning to the land and defending their desire to be here. He said it had nothing to do with God or prophecy. I'm just curious because you quoted more scripture in that Knesset address. I was there. I was in the room than I think any prime minister in the history of Israel has done in the modern Israel. So how do you see this issue is Israel only the product of men and women doing the right thing, or was God involved in it? I
think it's both. I don't think you have to choose the courage shown by the Jewish people through the generations that clung to their faith, that clung to those ancient promises, is one of the most inspiring stories in history. But I for my part, believe that on that day when Israel was, as the Bible tells us, created in a day in 1948. I couldn't be more proud to be an American in the nation that was the first country on earth to recognize the Jewish state of Israel. But 75 years on, through great struggle, through great hardship, the garden has come in the desert. And I give great credit to the courage and the sacrifice of the Jewish people through the generations and to this very moment. But I'm grateful to the providence of God, keeping his promises to the people of Israel in ways that have continued to inspire the world.
Well, that's our show for tonight. I hope you found it as fascinating as I did, but you have to come back next week. Why? Because I'm going to ask Pence probably the toughest questions yet. Do you have a relationship with Donald Trump anymore? What did you say to him when you got back from the crisis at the Capitol? Are you running for president again? And by the way, it's unprecedented in American political history for a former vice president to take on his former boss in a Republican primary. You got to watch it next week. In the meantime, keep praying for this country, for revival to spread, for a great awakening. Pray for Mr. Pence and his family. Pray for Donald Trump and his family. Pray for anyone who's running for president on either side. And come back next week. If you've missed any previous segments, go to rosenbergreport.tv. Check out our YouTube channel. And I'll see you, Lord willing, next week right here on the Rosenberg Report.